mocked his entire life, called an eccentric and a loser, an old man decides to challenge fate in his final bet. While the community laughs and sneers, he enters the game with a mysterious look, capable of disconcerting even the most skeptical. The contempt was general, but an invisible tension arose, as if something grand were about to happen. If you like stories that turn the tables and surprise you in the end, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. The first to react to the old man's new decision were precisely those who should have supported him most, his own family. His children whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval, as if bracing themselves for anticipated shame. His wife, tired from a lifetime of broken promises, said nothing. She just sighed with that look that blended pain and resignation. The neighbors, for their part, wasted no time in spreading the news as if it were juicy gossip from a soap opera. On every corner there was a sharp comment, a hidden chuckle, or even a side bet about inevitable failure. It was as if the entire community were united in a silent chorus. He'll never make it. And it wasn't just mockery. The daily humiliation weighed like a chain on that man's shoulders. Imagine living in a place where everyone knows your story and is constantly reminded of your failures. It's like when someone fails in a business venture and, years later, is still remembered only for that mistake, ignoring any other effort or learning. That's how the old man lived, surrounded by looks of contempt, with no room to start over. With every laugh or snide comment, the loneliness deepened, echoing within him. This shows us how collective opinion can be cruel and even more painful than the failure itself. But it was precisely in this hostile environment that the spark of overcoming was born. Rumors began to grow. Some said he was delirious. Others claimed it would be just another spectacle of public embarrassment. And ironically, the more they talked, the more they fueled anticipation about what would come next. The community, without realizing it, was creating the perfect stage for an unexpected turn of events. Because life is like that, when everyone expects only a repeat of a failure, any move outside the script becomes a source of doubt, curiosity, and discomfort. And it was in this realm of mockery and disbelief that the old man's gamble began to take on new forms, even if no one would admit it out loud. After all, even the deepest contempt harbors a hint of curious attention. And it was precisely this curiosity that would pave the way for the next step of his journey. Soon after the bet was announced, when everyone expected just another spectacle of failure, something unexpected began to unfold. It wasn't a thunderclap, nor a sudden miracle, but a subtle, almost imperceptible detail that escaped the unwary eye and yet would alter the entire course of history. The old man, discredited and mocked, made a surprising move. Too small to be considered a triumph, but big enough to plant the seed of doubt. It was as if suddenly, that plot already written by the community began to reveal a comma out of place, a gap no one had anticipated. And you know how it is. It only takes one spark to burn down an entire forest of certainties. The neighbors, previously busy laughing and mocking, stopped for a moment to take a closer look. The old man's behavior was at odds with anything he had done in the past. Was it luck? One muttered. Or did he know what he was doing? Another asked. The curious thing was that the initial disbelief turned into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that occurs when the audience suddenly realizes that perhaps the spectacle isn't as predictable as they imagined. It was like watching a soccer match, where the perceived underdog scores an unlikely goal in the last minute, and the entire stadium rises to its feet, not in applause, but in astonishment. And, As always happens in situations like this, curiosity began to take over the community. People who had previously completely ignored the old man's actions began to appear closer, feigning disinterest, but with their eyes glued to his every move. That unexpected detail, that off-script move, set off a chain reaction. The jokes still circulated, true, but now they were accompanied by a question mark. Contempt began to mix with the almost unconscious need to understand. It's like when a magician pulls something out of his hat in front of an audience and everyone, even the most skeptical, leans forward, trying to decipher the trick. The irony lay in how people, without admitting it, began to feel a certain internal discomfort. After all, if that man, so often considered a failure, suddenly showed there was calculation behind his moves, what would that mean for everyone else? How many times had they also missed opportunities out of sheer prejudice or inattention? And that's where the psychological impact begins. The old man wasn't just making his move, he was messing with collective pride, forcing each person to question their own certainties. With each small step, new rumors emerged. Some claimed it was all a coincidence. Others claimed the old man might be receiving help from someone in secret. Some even suggested something supernatural was at play, as if he had made a pact or discovered some kind of hidden trick. These speculations, far from lessening the stakes, only made them more intriguing. It was like watching a jigsaw puzzle come together before your eyes, but without being able to clearly see the final image. And at that point, the mystery no longer belonged solely to the old man. The entire community was involved. Every comment, every question thrown to the wind was like another piece added to the board. The neighbors who had previously scoffed now anxiously awaited the next move, like someone watching a thriller and can't put it down after the first episode. And it's precisely at this point that the narrative gains momentum. When the improbable begins to become plausible, and no one is quite sure whether they're witnessing a foretold failure or the beginning of a memorable victory. The initial detail, that seemingly insignificant glimpse, turned into something bigger. It was like the first crack in a wall that always seemed unshakable. Small, discreet, almost invisible, but enough to show that the wall could crumble. The old man, silent, maintained his posture with a calm that was irritating to skeptics. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to justify himself. Each calculated gesture, each firm look, was enough to stir doubt in the hearts of others. And let's face it, few things are more powerful than doubt, because it undermines certainties, breaks down prejudices, and opens space for the unexpected. From that moment on, the bet was no longer just his. It became a collective spectacle, with every move accompanied by watchful eyes and fervent speculation. The community, without realizing it, transformed the supposedly announced failure into an event of growing tension. The old man, with his initial move, had changed the game. And the curious thing is that the greatest impact was not the immediate result, but the subtle change it provoked within each spectator. The feeling that perhaps the stories weren't as predictable as they seemed. And of course, this brings us to an inevitable point. If that small twist was already capable of shaking so much conviction, what was to come? What secrets, strategies, or memories of the past could be hidden behind that serene gaze? It was just the beginning, an enigmatic prelude that prepared everyone, even the most skeptical, for discoveries that would change not only their perception of the old man, but also the very way each of them viewed their personal stakes in life. From the moment the old man's first move stopped, seeming like a stumble, and began to carry an air of mystery, something curious happened. People, who had previously laughed at him shamelessly, began following him with their eyes like amateur Investigators. It was almost comical. Neighbors who had never paid attention to his gait were now analyzing every step, trying to find hidden clues. Entire families gathered in front of their windows, discreetly spying, as if the man's backyard were a theater stage. The community, accustomed to ignoring his actions, was now obsessed. What lay behind that strange calm? Had he discovered a secret formula? Or was he simply prolonging the illusion before his inevitable downfall? And that's when his life began to unravel like an open book. People who previously hadn't bothered to even ask if he was okay now sought details about his youth, his habits, his mistakes, and even his forgotten victories. They discovered, for example, that he had once been a skilled player in his teens, known for card tournaments that drew crowds at rural fairs, a fact few remembered, as time, routine, and subsequent failures had erased any former luster. But now, this memory took on new life. What if he had harbored some silent skill all this time? What if each past defeat had actually been part of a disguised training session? The most intriguing thing was that the more they investigated, the more elements emerged that seemed to confirm this hypothesis. Old acquaintances reappeared with curious stories. Memories of nights when the old man seemed to predict his adversary's moves with almost frightening accuracy. Others told of his obsession with studying ancient books, of calculations scribbled in old notebooks that no one understood. Small fragments of memory, which had previously seemed irrelevant, now became valuable pieces of a puzzle. And the more the puzzle pieced together, the more the feeling grew that this man hid an intelligence no one had seen. Of course, not everyone accepted this idea willingly. There were those who preferred to believe it was all just luck. After all, acknowledging that the old man had a strategy would be like admitting that everyone had been wrong throughout their lives, and human pride is a heavy burden to bear. Thus, contradictory theories arose. Some said he had received privileged information, others that he was being manipulated by someone younger, a hidden accomplice. Even supernatural rumors arose. Who hasn't heard more superstitious neighbors whisper that the devil had a hand in these stories? The investigation was divided between those seeking concrete evidence and those who preferred to cling to fanciful explanations. But there was a fascinating detail about this phase. The old man remained silent. He didn't try to justify himself, defend himself, or confirm anything. Each new rumor only fueled curiosity, because the more people sought an explanation, the fewer answers he offered. This enigmatic posture turned any small gesture into a source of speculation. If he spent hours sitting in the backyard staring into space, someone would soon say he was meditating in secret, calculating his next move. If he entered the house, carrying an envelope, speculation swirled that it contained mysterious notes or even correspondence from someone instructing him from afar. It's amazing how the absence of words sometimes speaks louder than fiery speeches. And amid this effervescence of theories, characters emerged who became pivotal. A childhood friend revealed that the old man always had a peculiar gift for observing patterns. According to him, as children, the man was able to predict the outcome of a simple game of marbles with uncanny accuracy. Others recalled a time when he worked in banks, dealing with numbers, calculations, and probabilities. It was as if his entire life had been fertile ground, planting seeds that now, suddenly, began to blossom. And herein lies a powerful lesson. Often, the knowledge accumulated over a lifetime doesn't disappear. It simply lies dormant, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. With each new discovery, the bet ceased to be merely a pastime or the whim of a stubborn old man. It became a collective enigma, Passers-by no longer saw just an elderly gentleman trying his last adventure. They saw the possibility of something greater, a secret hidden beneath layers of disbelief. This created a palpable tension, an atmosphere of anticipation that left everyone feeling they were about to witness something historic. And at that point, the investigation wasn't just about him. The community began to see itself reflected in that story. After all, if a discredited man could be hiding a rare intelligence, how many others could carry invisible talents, stifled by the label of failure? It was as if, unconsciously, each resident began to revisit their own trajectory, wondering where they might have wasted skills or buried dreams. The old man, without uttering a single word, had become an uncomfortable mirror for everyone around him. And it is precisely here that the next great dilemma arises. If he truly had a strategy, if every move was part of a larger plan, what other revelations were yet to come? How deep did this mystery extend? What was he hiding up his sleeve that could completely transform the course of the bet? From the moment the bet took on a life of its own and ceased to be merely a street corner curiosity, figures began to emerge who seemed to carry hidden pieces of the old man's story. These weren't just any people. They were key figures, guardians of memories, accomplices in silence, or even old rivals returning from the past with information capable of altering the course of the narrative. The first to appear was a former workmate, a discreet man who, between sips of coffee at a local bar, stated that the old man had always had a peculiar talent for observing invisible patterns. According to him, in his youth, it was common to see him accurately predict the outcomes of small internal bets between colleagues, as if he had an internal compass pointing to the unexpected. This seemingly banal account rekindled suspicions. Had the old man been harboring a silent skill all these years, just waiting for the right moment to use it? As the days passed, other voices rose. An elderly neighbor, known for her sharp memory, revealed that the old man had been approached years ago by local merchants who asked his opinion before taking a risk in business. "He saw where no one else did," she said, with an enigmatic air. These revelations, far from sounding like belated praise, fueled the feeling that there was something carefully guarded in his biography, as if each public failure had served to camouflage a private strategy. Of course, this also raised suspicions. Was the old man manipulating everyone from the start? Had he planned every detail of the current venture to finally checkmate his critics? Things began to really heat up when contradictions emerged between the accounts. A distant nephew claimed his uncle had spent entire nights locked in his room, scribbling formulas, reviewing old notebooks, and muttering incomprehensible calculations. Another relative insisted it was nothing more than delusion, the product of a tired and stubborn mind. This disagreement further inflamed the community, which no longer knew who to believe. It was like watching a makeshift courtroom, where each testimony brought not only information, but also deeper questions. With each new testimony, the plot seemed to become even more intricate, as if the old man were made of multiple layers that no one could fully decipher. And as those directly involved in the bet began to approach, the conflict escalated. Rival players began to question whether they were being deceived, whether the old man's mysterious calm concealed some kind of deception. What had previously been merely a contest of luck or chance now took on the contours of a psychological duel. The looks became harsher, the words sharper, and the tension thicker. It was as if everyone suddenly realized they were facing not just a stubborn old man, but someone who could have calculated every move in advance. Doubt eroded not only the community's confidence, but also that of the competitors themselves, who began to rethink their own decisions. had they underestimated their opponent. This atmosphere of suspicion created an almost cinematic atmosphere. Each encounter with someone close to the old man added a new piece to the puzzle, but none of them fit perfectly. It was like assembling a picture in which some pieces seem superfluous, others seem to repeat, and the final design never fully reveals itself. And it is in this realm of uncertainty that the tension grows. The more they search for an answer, the more the questions multiply. And of course, this only prepared everyone for the next stage, in which revelations and confrontations would become inevitable, and far more painful than anyone could have imagined. With each new day, the bet seemed less like a simple game and more like a collective enigma. The rumors grew, the stares grew heavier, and the old man's calculated silence was like fuel thrown onto a fire about to explode. It was in this atmosphere that the first revelations began to emerge. It turned out he wasn't just trying his luck. There were notes, calculations, old records of past matches that revealed a strategic mind, capable of charting unlikely paths. A nephew found a notebook hidden in a drawer, full of seemingly disconnected scribbles, but which, to the attentive eye, revealed sequences and patterns. Word spread quickly, and suddenly that image of a loser began to melt away like sand slipping through his fingers. Confrontations soon arose. Players involved began to pressure him, demanding explanations. "Isn't this luck? Is it cheating?" they asked, trying to extract a confession from him. But the old man, with his enigmatic manner, simply smiled, as if harboring a secret he didn't intend to give away. This silence was his weapon. After all, when someone doesn't provide answers, the others begin to fight among themselves for explanations. And that's exactly what happened. The opponents began to distrust each other, believing they might be being manipulated. What was supposed to be a simple bet turned into a psychological battlefield, where every look carried suspicion and every word sounded like an accusation. Amidst this tension, an emotional confrontation unfolded. One of the sons, tired of the public humiliation he believed his father would make them endure again, burst into tears in front of the community. "Why do you insist on this? Wasn't a lifetime of being laughed at enough?" he shouted, exposing the pain the old man's silence had always concealed. It was at that moment that the audience, accustomed to laughter, began to realize that behind his stubbornness lay more than pride. A lifetime of frustrations, defeats, and ignored attempts. The bet was no longer just a game. It was the last chance to reclaim a dignity crushed by years of discredit. And then came the most shocking revelation. The old man finally broke the silence. In a firm voice, he said, "I'm not here by luck, nor by whim. I'm here because I've learned that every defeat carries a lesson, and every humiliation, an opportunity to rise." These words, simple yet charged with truth, echoed like a punch to the collective gut. It wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about proving that life isn't defined by the eyes of others, but by the courage to rise again. Those notes, those calculations, weren't cheating. They were the fruit of years of observation, patience, and intelligence, hidden beneath the mask of failure. The impact was immediate. The community, which until then had seen him as nothing more than an eccentric, began to face the possibility that they were facing a man who, in silence, had been building something greater. The confrontations between the adversaries intensified, but they were no longer just about the game itself. They were about the revelation that the old man was not who everyone thought. The tension reached a new level because the bet had become a public trial, where every word, every gesture, could be the key to fate. And like any well-woven plot, this moment of revelation wasn't the end. but merely a harbinger of something even more intense. If until now the old man had baffled everyone with only hints and silence, what would happen when the decisive moment arrived, when he faced the final play that could silence the mockers once and for all? The decisive moment had arrived. After so many suspicions, confrontations, and revelations, everyone's eyes were fixed on the old man. The entire community seemed to hold its breath, as if time had slowed down just to watch the outcome. The silence was almost suffocating, interrupted only by the pounding of hearts. On one side were his prepared rivals, convinced he wouldn't have the courage to see the bet through. On the other, the old man, serene, with that look that blended weariness and confidence, as if carrying on his shoulders not just the responsibility of a game, but of an entire life. At that moment, the tension reached an almost unbearable level. Some spectators covered their mouths, others exchanged nervous glances, and even the most incredulous began to doubt their own disbelief. It was like watching a tightrope walker walk without a safety net. Any wrong move could seal their fall. But suddenly, the old man made his final move. And it was something so unexpected, so far from the script everyone had written for him, that the collective reaction was one of absolute shock. Eyes widened, mouths dropped open in astonishment. The improbable had happened before them, live, without tricks or excuses. The move was more than a victory. It was a breakthrough. What had seemed impossible was now there, before everyone's eyes, forcing everyone to swallow their laughter and reconsider their certainties. Even the rivals, who had previously mocked, stood still, unable to react immediately. The old man had not only been proven right, but had reversed the logic of the game with an elegance that was almost cruel to those who didn't believe in him. It wasn't luck. It was calculation, experience, and a courage few would have to put everything on the line in life's final act. And the most impressive thing is that, in that moment, he didn't need to say anything. The silence that had previously been a source of mockery had become authority. The old man didn't speak, but his play screamed. It screamed that he had never been a fool, that every previous failure had been part of a silent learning experience, that every mockery he'd received had become fuel. The audience understood this without him having to open his mouth, and that's where the climax gains momentum. It's not just about the victory itself, but about the transformation of collective perception. The shock was unleashed. The one who had been despised for years had just left everyone speechless. But, as you can imagine, this wouldn't be the final twist. Because if the climax brought unexpected triumph, what followed would bring something even more profound. The final solution, where justice and recognition would intertwine in a way no one could avoid. As the dust from the final play began to settle, the truth could no longer be ignored. The old man, so often called a fool, had won. And it wasn't just a victory in the game, it was a triumph over years of contempt, decades of mockery and indifference. The community, which had always viewed him as a laughingstock, was now forced to rethink its judgments. There was no longer room for malicious laughter. The heavy silence that fell over the street was the greatest proof that something had changed forever. Symbolic justice was served. Those who had laughed at his expense had to swallow their disbelief. With each disconcerted look, it was as if the old man recovered fragments of dignity that had been stripped from him throughout his life. There was no revenge in his gestures, only the serenity of someone who knows that the truth, sooner or later, prevails. The respect, which had never been given to him, now came as a debt paid in arrears. And curiously, it tasted stronger precisely because it had been earned at a time when no one else believed. And deep down, everyone knew that victory went beyond cards, numbers, or chance. It was a cruel and inspiring reminder that underestimating someone can be costly, that appearances can be deceiving, and that genius often hides where one least expects it. The old man had not only won the bet, he had earned the right to be remembered, not as a loser, but as someone who dared to defy the label imposed on him. Justice, finally, was revealed not in punishment, but in belated recognition. And this recognition, paradoxically, was worth more than any material reward. And of course, if everyone thought that was the end, little did they know that the most profound part of the story still remained. The emotional outcome, where the final reflection would transform that triumph into a legacy. As night fell and the community's hubbub subsided, the old man sat silently, as if all the tension of life had finally found rest. There were no shouts of celebration, nor any need for boasting. His victory spoke for itself, and more than that, it left an indelible mark on everyone's memory. He had proven that it's never too late to surprise, that life can turn upside down just when everyone thinks there's no more time. It was as if every wrinkle on his face, once a symbol of defeat, was now seen as a map of wisdom and resilience. The looks that had previously been filled with contempt now held respect, and even a certain embarrassment. The family, moved, understood that this gamble wasn't just about winning or losing money. It was about proving dignity, regaining a voice, showing that experience isn't dead weight, but accumulated strength. The community, in turn, learned a bitter lesson. To underestimate someone is to close one's eyes to the possibility of being surprised. And ultimately, that man's greatest legacy lay not in the bet itself, but in what it symbolized: perseverance, courage, and the certainty that life always reserves one last chance for those who refuse to give up. His story didn't end as an anecdote of failure, but as a testament to the fact that even those who are disbelieved can write a grand finale. And it is precisely there that the true impact is revealed, not as the end of a game, but as the beginning of a profound reflection that would resonate far beyond that small community.